Welcome back to News in Focus. Now, the Israeli army has continued its offensive in the West Bank city of Jenin and its refugee camps for another day. Witnesses said the Israeli army was still cordoning off the refugee camp from all directions, and clashes between Israeli occupation forces and Palestinian resistance fighters, along with sounds of explosions, were reported. Now, this comes at the back of the ceasefire deal, which was agreed just under 2 weeks ago between Hamas and Israel for Palestinian hostages to be returning back to, of course, Gaza, and Israeli captives going back to their homeland. But there still seems to be a lot of fighting that is happening in the occupied West Bank region. And joining me now from Nablus, I'd like to welcome freelance journalist Rafa Musmar. Rafa, shukran so much for joining us here on News in Focus on Hilaal TV.
You are absolutely welcome, and thank you for hosting me.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. I think, Rafa, the Jenin attacks that have been occurring from the Israeli occupation forces, this goes back to even prior October the 7th, 2023. I mean, from the scale of what the Israeli occupation forces are doing, talk to us about that and just the bombardment that they've been doing in that part of Palestine.
Yes, actually, West Bank, especially refugee camps, has been attacked since 2022, when there was like new young armed fighters, freedom fighters, as we call them here. They decided to raise the case of occupied Palestine again, because we've been internationally held for a while by international community, and no one is speaking about the occupation and how much is it affected the people here in Palestine. So they are doing in Jenin refugee camp right now is the usual that they do. Let's say before 20 years ago, they attacked the whole West Bank, and they were using F-16, shelling and bombarding every establishment that they call it there was an armed people. Right now, they are targeting apartments. Right now, they are targeting the people at the market. We can say, unfortunately, it's the same scenario of the genocide, which was used in Gaza Strip. Right now, they are using it in West Bank, more concentrated at the refugee camps. So before I talk to you, there was like targeting a car in Ain Shams refugee camp. It's in Tul Karm, up north of West Bank. And there was, according to them, the leader of one of the armed groups in that refugee camp. So what they are doing right now is the usual scenario of a criminal attitude by the Israeli occupation forces in Jenin refugee camp, Balata refugee camp, Tul Karm refugee camp, and most of the refugee camps in all over West Bank, in Jericho too, at Haitian, in Bethlehem. So the issue of refugee camps is the symbol right now, which is the symbolic of right of return, which is the basic cornerstone for the issue of Palestine, right of return for Palestinian refugees, and the case which started in 1948.
Rafa, I want to touch on 2022 because obviously, and this would be something very close to you as a journalist, that was the year, of course, Shireen Abu Akleh was murdered by the Israeli occupation forces. And from a journalistic point of view, you know, speaking to many journalists from Gaza, their challenge was, how do we survive during these difficult times? I mean, how are your colleagues, especially in Jenin, really trying to cover what is happening there, given that at any moment, just like in Gaza, it could be their last with the shelling and the bombing that is occurring from the Israeli forces?
As you said, like we lost Shireen Abu Akleh 3 years ago, and she was killed directly by a sniper. Like he targeted her personally. Even she was wearing all of the equipment which reflects that she's a journalist, and she should be protected by the international law and normal law, local law, and everybody's law. But unfortunately, right now the journalists are targeted in West Bank, not as much as in Gaza. In Gaza, they were waiting them to go to their families, and then they were bombing them to die with the whole family. Right now, the journalists in West Bank, they are facing difficulties, like they can't do their job simply. They are threatened by the D9, which is the big vehicle, which is like you can't stand in front of it. By the soldiers, they directly point to them by their guns, and they fire sometimes at the legs, at the hands. But like, let's say until now, a direct shot happened, not really happened. They arrest them, and they stop some of them of working, like what happened with Al Jazeera when the Israeli army decided to ban this satellite channel from working because they consider to them they are like reflecting the facts, and they accuse them they are do kind of incitement, which is, of course, it's not true because they're reflecting what's happening in West Bank and Gaza.
Rafa, the arrests that are happening, and I've been, watching, not just social media, but also, Al Jazeera quite carefully, and a lot of them seem to be youngsters. Even during the genocide that was happening in Gaza, when arrests were happening in various parts of the occupied West Bank, it seems to be youngsters, and not just young men, young women also at the same time. For the viewers out there that maybe are not aware of just the destruction that is happening right now within West Bank in terms of the raids, why is there a necessity from the Israelis to go ahead and actually arrest young men and women, and at such frequent times?
It's collective punishment. This is what the Israelis do simply. When they arrest a person, a young woman, let's say, or a young man, related to any arm of a struggle or not, they just arrest people for the issue of arresting. They're threatening everybody, and they are doing the collective punishment by the whole family punished by that, because they took, when they arrest people, you get beaten by the whole members of the Israeli soldiers who come and arrest you. You face all type of disrespect, and sometimes they ask to take your personal phone, your personal laptop, even if you are working in the field of media or not.
Sure.
They took things in order to make a case against you. So this is why, for example, right now we have the Palestinians detainees in the Israeli prisons called, they are under the Israeli administrative detention, and there are over 3,000, for example. Many of these people, they are like less than 16, and many of these people are old. Like, because you have a picture of Yahya Sinwar, for example, in your cell phone. That's a case against you. That's accusation by the Israeli government, by the Israeli soldier, and by the crazy security minister who resigned, thank God. And we are simply under all type of censorship, like when we pass checkpoints. Right now, West Bank is facing a very huge siege and closure. We have 1,000 checkpoints across the area of West Bank, which is very tiny, small area. Checkpoints between a village and a village, not just between cities and cities. They are right now between village and village. So when you are talking about collective punishment, segregation, you are talking about a criminal regime. And it's the same as what happened, like in South Africa. We are facing racism here. We are facing all kind of hard punishments, like ghettos. Everybody is really locked in his place. It's not easy to move from a small area to another small area, especially Palestinian villages are getting smaller and smaller with all of this big number of building settlements around, of course.
After the break, I continue my conversation with Rafa Musmar. We're, of course, talking about Israeli attacks that are currently on the go in Jenin, which is situated in the occupied West Bank. Do stay tuned. Welcome back to News in Focus. I'm still in conversation with Rafa Musmar, who is a freelance journalist based in Nablus in the occupied West Bank. Rafa, again, thank you so much for staying with us. I I want to touch on the Palestinian Authority, Rafa. The reason why I ask this is because I've been speaking to many other colleagues and many other residents within the occupied West Bank, and they say that the Palestinian Authority themselves conducted raids on various freedom fighters that are occurring within the occupied territory of Palestine, and especially that of the West Bank. Talk to us about that, and why is this happening from the Palestinian Authority under Mahmoud Abbas?
Simply because the Americans, they requested to show if the Palestinian Authority is still able to control Gaza in case if they suggested Gaza, Palestinian Authority to rule Gaza. So unfortunately, they are dealing with the Palestinian Authority like an adult person, an entity of people who can't control or lead anything. So if you want to go and lead, or even open your mouth that as a Palestinian Authority, I want to rule Gaza, so they will ask him, or as they asked the Palestinian Authority directly to Mr. Mahmoud Abbas about, like, why don't you rule West Bank correctly? Why don't you put the law on the street? Sure. So it was like the first reaction by the Palestinian Authority that at least let me show that I can control West Bank, and especially Jenin refugee camp. Jenin refugee camp, it's been like the latest activist spot lately. So it was like a direct request from the Americans and the Israelis about Jenin. And Jenin is a refugee camp for people who has been suffering and facing all kinds of let's say occupation in all ways, like a high number of unemployment, a high number of a lack of water and electricity, a very tiny space with over 10,000 people. Like it's 1 kilometer square, so it's like within 10,000 people, which is like very crowded, very narrow place. Very unemployment is there. Poverty is there. So, of course, you will have people who refuse this situation. So, it's a case by itself. It reflects the whole case, let's say, about Palestinian in general. Before 7th of October, Gaza was totally sieged, and the number of unemployment, it was very high, because the people, they can't go anywhere. People who wants to go to study outside because they want to save their families, to bring money to work, have money, and then bring it back to their people. But the cases in West Bank, it's been very risky. So it's the area where everybody is boiling, like everybody is angry. So Jenin, as a symbol of a real reflection of the case of Palestinian people. Like it's very hard to live under Israeli occupation, and you don't have work, you don't have money, you are not able to move from place to place, and at the same time you just Jenin is very close to the borders to see Israelis enjoying their lives in the lands of the ancestors, the lands of your grandfather or grandmother who's still alive, and tell you that field is mine. I planted that tree. I planted 75 years ago, because these people are still living together. So the story of how they were uprooted in 1948, it is still alive. So of course Jenin is a targeted place by everybody, just to show that I can lead, I can control, I can be the main responsible for the future stages. Especially they were killing people in Gaza and talking about next day of the war. So it's unfortunately it's not a good thing to do it by the Palestinian Authority, but it was one of the main tasks it was asked by the Americans and the Israelis who were fighting the people of Gaza, simply the civilians in Gaza.
Rafa, I want to touch on settler attacks, because it continues to grow, and this comes at a time where Donald Trump has ascended into the White House, and he's lifted sanctions on the settlers, I can already see that this is not going to end well. It's going to end as badly as it could be for the people of the occupied West Bank, because if these sanctions are lifted, it allows for these settlers to go ahead and actually continue to seize land. What are the residents, and Nablus is no exception to that, what are the residents not only of Jenin but of Nablus and other parts of the occupied West Bank talking about this, given that the sanctions have just been lifted by Donald Trump?
Yeah, it's simply they complement each other by being as the Palestinians the bloodshed for their compliments. So it's simply the Israelis, especially Israeli settlers, they are unleashed, armed radicals people. We are facing them from 16 years directly face to face, simply by the kids of the hell, these people who were trained and taught by the Hakhams, the heads of religious schools in their settlements, which is really close to us, like Nablus surrounded with 4 settlements. Silfit is most of its land was seized to the settlements. Kalkilia, for example, most of the land were taken by the wall, and most of the rest of the land were taken by other settlements. The same with Tulkarm. So you are talking about a case of 16 years of facing their violence and radical attitudes and their violence. These people, they burned the family in Madama, close to Nablus, like 15 minutes in the car from my house to Madama. And they burned the Wabshe family, a mother, a father, and a boy. And one kid was alive and lucky to see what was happened. The settlers, they are right now more armed, and that's more dangerous for sure, because they were in the issue of main goals by the radical government, Israeli government right now, by arming these people in order to make them the second army working here, and to be their how they call it, like the beaten hand, like the executive forces for these settlements to work in the area here. And by the way, these armed settlers, they are protected most of the time by the soldiers. So no matter they do, by burning olive trees, by burning goats, by kidnapping kids, burning kids, like what happened with Muhammad Abu Khair from suburb of Jerusalem, or what happened with the Al Mghayr area when they tried to kidnap a family there. Mghayr is one of the villages around Ramallah. So they become more and more organized. So at the beginning, they were more bunch of kids. They are not that much important. This is how they were shaped by the Israeli government and army. They are not harmful, but right now they become a real armed forces working in the ground within a very high support from the government, which is reflect them, or they voted for that government to win and control the country. And these people, they are right now beating the soldiers when if any of the soldiers try to stop them in a way that's too much of violence. And recently happened in Al Funduk. It's a village between Kalkilia and Nablus. They were like around 50 masked radical settlers. They start to burn and make violence in the Funduk village. And this village, it's in a street which is a basic street, a main street connecting Kalkilia, Tulkarm to Nablus, and it's plenty of settlers around there. So they become masked, like the Israeli soldiers couldn't recognize them. So they shoot 3 of them. One of them was killed. And when they asked the soldier, why did you shoot at them? He said, I thought they are Palestinians. Because the soldiers, they have the right to shoot Palestinians without even thinking about their lives. And this must it turns around that they are settlers. They go to do this kind of violence, burning houses and cars for the Palestinians in Al Funduk village. So the soldier right now is in kind of punishment by this army because he did not make sure that he's not shooting an Israelis.
Rafa,
So it's a very racist system, simply.
without a doubt, you look at the visuals, you see the videos, and it speaks exactly of that, the radical violence against the Palestinians in the occupied territory of the West Bank. Rafa, unfortunately, we have come towards the end of this conversation. Shukran so much for joining us. Much appreciated.
You are welcome, and thank you for having me.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. That's Rafa Musmar. She is a freelance journalist from Nablus in the occupied West Bank. Well, we're going to be getting another 24 minutes because we're going to be discussing last week's World Economic Forum. I'm going to be joined by Rudiger Tieselmann, who is a German lawyer and board advisor and, of course, a long-time World Economic Forum participant from Frankfurt in Germany. Do stay tuned.